A black CEO was attacked on her own jet. What she did next shocked the aviation industry. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The cabin was calm in the way only private jets ever are: quiet leather seats, soft overhead lighting, the steady hum of engines smoothing out the world below. At 30,000 feet, everything felt controlled, ordered, safe. Then a voice cut through the aisle. "Get out of this seat, now!" Heads snapped up. Conversations died mid-breath. A woman in a gray and navy uniform leaned over the row, close enough that her shadow fell across the passenger by the window. The passenger, a black woman in a deep, wine-colored blazer, looked up, surprised but composed, hands still folded in her lap. The flight attendant didn't wait for a response. One hand shot forward, fingers tangling in the woman's hair. The other came up hard, gripping her jaw, thumb pressing into her cheek as if to force her face away from the window. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone in the aisle froze, half standing. Another passenger instinctively reached for a phone, then stopped, unsure whether to film or intervene. The jet, moments ago a sanctuary of privilege, had become a sealed room of shock. "You don't belong here," the attendant hissed, low and sharp, as if the words themselves were policy. The woman in the seat did not scream. She did not swing back. She didn't even raise her voice. Her eyes stayed locked on the attendant's face, steady, assessing, almost clinical. The kind of look that wasn't searching for help, but calculating consequence. To the people watching, it looked like restraint. To anyone who knew power, it was something else entirely. The attendant tightened her grip, mistaking silence for surrender. "Move!" she snapped, glancing toward the front of the cabin for backup. "You're holding up the flight!" A man across the aisle shook his head, whispering, "This is going too far." A woman behind him covered her mouth, eyes wide. No one yet knew who the woman in the window seat was. All they knew was that a line had been crossed and crossed publicly. The black woman inhaled once, slow and controlled. A memory flickered another cabin years earlier, another hand pulling at her arm, another voice telling her she was in the wrong place. Back then, she had stood up because she had no choice. This time, she stayed seated because she did. The attendant leaned closer, anger rising now that compliance hadn't come instantly. "Last warning," she said, fingers still buried in hair, hand still on the woman's face. "Get out of the seat." The jet's engines droned on, indifferent. But inside the cabin, time compressed. Every witness felt it, the sense that whatever happened next would not be small, that this wasn't just about a seat or a flight. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, audible enough for everyone to hear. "Take your hands off me." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a threat. It was a line drawn. And the moment those words left her mouth, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, because something told them this confrontation was no longer going in the direction the flight attendant thought it was. Not even close. The cabin didn't erupt. It tightened. After those 4 words, "Take your hands off me," nothing moved the way it should have. No immediate apology, no retreat. Just a fraction of a second where the flight attendant hesitated, surprised not by resistance, but by the tone. Calm, level, unafraid. Her fingers loosened slightly, though she didn't pull away. "Not yet. You don't get to give orders here," the attendant snapped, straightening just enough to remind everyone who she thought was in control. "This seat is restricted." Restricted. The word carried weight in places like this. It was the polite mask authority wore when it wanted to sound reasonable. The woman in the window seat, still seated, still composed, tilted her head just a fraction. The movement was subtle, but deliberate. Her posture never collapsed. Her shoulders stayed squared. Her hands rested calmly on the armrests, as if she were waiting for a meeting to begin rather than enduring a public assault at 30,000 feet. To the untrained eye, she looked cornered. To anyone who had spent time in boardrooms, courtrooms, or crisis rooms, she looked prepared. Around them, the cabin filled with quiet signals of discomfort. A man 2 rows back cleared his throat but said nothing. A woman near the aisle shifted her bag onto her lap, as if bracing for turbulence that hadn't yet come. Even the hum of the jet seemed louder now, pressing against the silence. The attendant glanced toward the front again, searching for reinforcement. She was used to people folding by this point, voices rising, apologies spilling out, explanations tumbling over themselves in a desperate attempt to belong. None of that came. Instead, the woman's gaze moved calmly across the cabin, not pleading, not searching for allies, simply taking inventory, witnesses, faces, reactions, evidence. She had learned long ago that moments like this were never just about the moment. They were about what could be proven later. The attendant scoffed. "You think staying quiet is going to help you?" she muttered. "It won't." The woman didn't answer right away. A memory surfaced, uninvited, sharp. A commercial flight years earlier. Economy. A gate agent insisting her ticket was wrong, hands gripping her boarding pass a little too tightly, voices lowering when they thought no one important was listening. Back then, she had explained herself 3 times before being believed. That version of her no longer existed. She looked back up at the attendant, eyes steady, voice still low. "You've made your point," she said. "Now step back." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed differently, like a gavel instead of a shout. The attendant laughed once, short and dismissive, but it rang hollow. "You're really committed to this act," she said. "I'll give you that." A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin. Someone whispered, "This is wrong," barely audible but unmistakable. The woman in the seat heard it. She heard everything. Now the shifting, the murmurs, the subtle change in the air when people realized they were watching something they wouldn't be able to unsee. She remained still. Silence, in moments like this, was not submission. It was control. It forced the other person to keep escalating, to reveal more than they meant to. Every second the attendant stayed in her space, every word she added tightened the noose around her own authority. The attendant took a step back at last, not out of respect, but to signal she was done playing nice. She reached for the intercom clipped near her collar. "Captain," she said sharply, eyes still locked on the woman. "We have a non-compliant passenger." Non-compliant. The word echoed in the cabin, heavier than it should have been. The woman exhaled slowly through her nose. She didn't correct her. Not yet. She didn't explain who she was. Not yet. She simply leaned back into the seat she was being told she didn't deserve, gaze forward, spine straight. If this was going to escalate, she would let it escalate fully. Because some lessons only land when the room is watching. The intercom crackled softly against the silence, a faint electronic click that somehow felt louder than shouting. The flight attendant's finger hovered there for a second, just long enough to be seen before she pressed it. "Captain, we have a situation in the cabin," she said, voice sharpened into something official. "A passenger is refusing to comply." Refusing to comply. The phrase landed like a verdict before a trial. The woman in the window seat didn't react. Her eyes remained forward now, not on the attendant, not on the other passengers, but on the curve of the cabin wall. Calm, grounded, as if she were anchoring herself while the room tilted around her. A second attendant approached from the front, taller, older, wearing authority the way others wore uniforms. He stopped a few steps away, taking in the scene, the rigid posture, the cluster of eyes, the tension thick enough to touch. "What's going on?" he asked. "She won't move," the first attendant said quickly. "She's in a restricted seat." The man glanced at the seat, then at the woman occupying it. He didn't ask for a boarding pass, didn't ask for a name. He looked at her clothes instead, wine-colored blazer, clean lines, no visible insignia of wealth, and made a decision that felt immediate and irreversible. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but distant, "we need you to cooperate." The woman turned her head slowly, finally meeting his eyes. "I am cooperating," she replied. "I'm seated." A murmur spread through the cabin. Someone let out a nervous laugh that died instantly. Another passenger whispered, "She's not wrong." The man frowned. "You're creating a disturbance." The word you hung there, heavy with implication. The first attendant crossed her arms, confidence returning now that backup had arrived. "We've already warned her." warned her, as if warning justified hands in hair, fingers on a face. The woman's jaw tightened not with fear but with restraint. She knew this part, the moment where authority began to stack on itself, where each person leaned on the last decision instead of examining it. Policy over people, procedure over truth. Around them, the cabin was no longer neutral. A businessman 2 rows up leaned into the aisle. "I saw what happened," he said cautiously. "She didn't start anything." The older attendant shot him a look. "Sir, please remain seated." The businessman hesitated, then sat back, eyes still fixed on the scene. Silence followed not agreement, but fear of crossing into it. The woman in the seat noticed everything. The way the attendant's shoulders squared, the way the other attendant stood just close enough to be intimidating, the way the witnesses shrank, one by one, when confronted with uniform and tone. This was how it always worked, not with one act, but with a chain of them. "You need to stand up," the older attendant said. "Now." The woman looked up at him. "And if I don't?" His jaw tightened. "Then we escalate." There it was. The word she'd been waiting for. Escalate meant reports. It meant security. It meant blame assigned before facts. It meant a narrative that would travel faster than the truth ever could. A younger attendant stood frozen near the galley, tablet clutched to her chest. Her eyes flicked between the woman and the crew, uncertainty written across her face. She glanced down at the screen in her hands, scrolling once, then stopping abruptly. Her expression changed. She looked up, then down again, as if hoping she'd misread it. She hadn't. "Sir," she said quietly, barely louder than the engines. "Her name is—" "Not now," the older attendant snapped without turning. "Stay out of this." The younger attendant swallowed hard. She stepped back, but her gaze never left the woman in the seat. Something about the situation no longer fit. Something about the confidence, the stillness, the absence of panic. The first attendant leaned in again, lowering her voice to a hiss. "You should have just moved," she said. "Now you've made it worse." The woman met her gaze one last time before looking away. "No," she said softly. "You did." A chill passed through the cabin, not from altitude, but from the certainty in her tone. The kind of certainty that didn't need witnesses to exist, but now had plenty. The jet continued forward through open sky, unaware that inside its cabin, a quiet confrontation had crossed into something much bigger than a seat, and it was no longer under the crew's control. The younger attendant stood near the galley, tablet pressed to her chest like a shield. Her pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the engines. She had been trained to follow protocol, to defer to senior crew, to never contradict authority in front of passengers. But the screen in her hands refused to cooperate with that training. She looked down again. The name was still there, highlighted, flagged. Not in red, something rarer. A symbol reserved for internal use only. Ownership-level access. The kind of marker most crew members went their entire careers without ever seeing. Her mouth went dry. She glanced up at the woman in the window seat. The calm posture, the unflinching gaze, the absence of panic that no ordinary passenger ever managed once words like non-compliant entered the air. It wasn't arrogance. It was familiarity, the kind that came from being on the other side of power for a very long time. "Sir," she tried again, louder now, voice tight but steady. "We need to verify something." The older attendant shot her a warning look. "I said stay out of this." "VD, VD, VD, S2. Enough." The word cut her off cleanly. A few passengers noticed. Heads turned. The sense that something was being suppressed, something important crept through the cabin like a draft. The businessman from earlier leaned forward again, emboldened by the tension. "Why won't anyone just check?" he asked. "She hasn't done anything." "Sir," the older attendant replied sharply, "this doesn't concern you." "It does if we're watching someone get manhandled," the man said, louder now. A ripple of agreement followed. Not applause, not outrage, just the subtle sound of people no longer willing to pretend this was normal. The younger attendant's fingers tightened around the tablet. Her training told her to stop. Her conscience told her to speak. She took one step forward. "I saw the manifest," she said, voice shaking but audible. This isn't a standard booking." The cabin went still. The first attendant laughed, sharp and dismissive. You're misreading it, she said. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. I'm not, the younger attendant replied. She swallowed, then continued. There's a clearance code. I've never seen it before. The older attendant turned fully toward her now, eyes hard. You're out of line. With 300 ones. The woman in the window seat closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in relief, not in fear, but in recognition. This was the pivot, the moment where silence began to crack, not because she forced it, but because someone else chose truth over comfort. She opened her eyes and looked at the younger attendant. Just once. A look that said you're right without saying a word. That was all the encouragement the younger attendant needed. This isn't a seating issue, she said, louder now. This is B. Stop, the older attendant barked. You're jeopardizing the flight. The irony hung there, heavy and unmistakable. A woman across the aisle stood up, heart pounding. If you're wrong, she said, addressing the crew, you're attacking the wrong person. The first attendant scoffed. And if we're right? The woman didn't hesitate. Then you still crossed a line. A murmur of agreement spread, tentative but growing. No one rushed forward. No one grabbed a uniform. But the cabin had shifted. The crew no longer owned the narrative outright. The younger attendant lowered her voice, but not her resolve. We should pause, she said, just until we confirm. The older attendant hesitated. Just for a second. In that pause, something fragile surfaced doubt. The woman in the window seat leaned back slightly, hands still calm, posture unchanged. She didn't press the advantage. She didn't demand anything. She let the moment breathe, knowing that pressure applied too early only made people defensive. The jet continued its steady course through open sky, but inside the cabin the balance had changed. Authority was no longer unquestioned. Witnesses were no longer invisible. And somewhere between a flagged name on a tablet and a room full of watching eyes, the truth was beginning to surface whether the crew was ready for it or not. The pause didn't last. It never does. Authority, once questioned, tends to overcorrect, and the older attendant did exactly that. His jaw set, shoulders squared, voice hardening as if volume could erase doubt. This conversation is over, he said. You are delaying the flight. He turned back to the woman in the window seat, eyes cold now. Stand up, immediately. The cabin felt smaller, closer, like the walls had leaned in to listen. The woman didn't move. Not out of defiance, but because she understood something everyone else was only beginning to sense. If she stood now, the story would be rewritten. Compliance would be mistaken for guilt. Silence would be edited into consent. She lifted her eyes slowly. You're confusing control with correctness, she said. The first attendant scoffed. Listen to her, she muttered, still acting like she belongs. Then she said it. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. People like you don't belong up here. The sentence cut through the cabin with surgical precision. A few passengers inhaled sharply. Someone whispered, "Oh no," under their breath. The younger attendant near the galley went pale. The woman in the seat felt the weight of it, not new, not surprising, but familiar, like a scar that never fully faded, only hardened. Another memory surfaced, unbidden. A corporate shuttle years ago, a security guard insisting she wait while others boarded. The look of confusion when her badge unlocked the door he had just blocked. The apology that came too late to matter. Back then, she had swallowed it. Not today. She rose slowly to her feet, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to reclaim space. The attendant stiffened, misreading the movement as escalation. She was careful with her voice. You crossed a line, she said. Not just with me. In front of everyone. The older attendant laughed once, sharp and humorless. You don't get to lecture us. The woman glanced around the cabin. Phones were no longer hidden, eyes no longer averted. Whatever this was, it was no longer private. I'm not lecturing, she replied. I'm documenting. That word landed differently. The younger attendant's tablet chimed softly, an automatic system refresh. She looked down again, then up, eyes wide. Sir, she said, voice barely steady. The clearance code just updated. The older attendant snapped. I don't care. With that has a 22 have, but he did. Everyone did. The woman reached into her blazer pocket and removed her phone, not hurried, not dramatic. She unlocked it with a single motion and held it loosely at her side. "I gave you multiple chances to step back," she said quietly. "You chose not to." The first attendant bristled. "Are you threatening us?" "No," the woman answered. "I'm ending this." The engines hummed on, steady and indifferent. But inside the cabin, something fundamental had shifted. The crew no longer looked certain. The witnesses no longer looked afraid. This was no longer about a seat, or a misunderstanding, or a protocol gone wrong. This was the moment when disrespect reached its limit and consequences prepared to enter the room. And the woman everyone had underestimated was about to decide how public those consequences would be. The woman didn't raise her phone right away. That alone unsettled them. In moments like this, people expected panic, shaky hands, frantic dialing, the reflex to call for help. What they didn't expect was restraint, deliberate, controlled, almost surgical. She took one slow step back into the space of her seat, not retreating but grounding herself. Her blazer fell neatly back into place. Her posture straightened. The chaos around her seemed to orbit while she stayed still at the center of it. "This ends now," she said, not louder than before, but firmer. "Final." The older attendant scoffed, though the sound lacked confidence. "You don't decide that." She met his gaze. "I do." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't thrown. They were stated, like a fact long overdue. She unlocked her phone. No emergency number, no visible distress, just a single contact already pinned to the top of her screen. She tapped once. It rang only half a second before someone answered. "Yes, Maham," a calm voice said on the other end. "We're live." "B." Everyone. The color drained from the younger attendant's face. She recognized the tone immediately. Operations level. Real-time monitoring. Not customer service. Not complaints. The woman turned slightly, angling the phone so the crew could hear. "Confirm aircraft ID," she said. A pause. Fingers flying somewhere far away. "Confirmed," the voice replied. "Private charter, owner on board." The cabin went silent. Not the awkward silence of discomfort, but the heavy, compressed silence of realization. Like pressure shifting before a storm. The older attendant's mouth opened, then closed. "That's not," he began. She didn't let him finish. "You put your hands on me," she said calmly. "You misrepresented authority, and you did it in front of witnesses." She glanced briefly around the cabin, not to seek validation, but to acknowledge presence. Faces stared back at her, wide-eyed, alert, suddenly aware that they were part of something official. "To be clear," she continued, voice steady, "this is not a complaint. This is a report." The first attendant took a step back, instinctively. "We were just following. Policy does not justify assault," the woman said, cutting in without raising her voice. "And ignorance does not protect you from consequences." On the phone, the voice spoke again. "Ma'am, we're seeing irregular crew behavior logged in the last 5 minutes." "Good," she replied. "Lock access." Was. That rhythment. A faint chime echoed from the crew's tablets, subtle but unmistakable. Screens refreshed. Icons disappeared. Permissions revoked. The younger attendant looked down at her device, eyes wide. "Sir," she whispered to the older one. "I just lost access." The older attendant reached for his own tablet. Nothing responded. His authority, once so casually wielded, evaporated in real time. "What did you do?" he demanded, voice cracking despite himself. The woman finally turned fully toward him. Her expression wasn't angry. It was resolute. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I authorized it." The cabin exhaled collectively. Not relief, anticipation. She brought the phone back to her ear. "Initiate protocol," she said. "Suspend this crew pending investigation. Prepare to ground the aircraft at the nearest approved location." A beat. "Understood," the voice replied. Executing now. The engines kept humming. The jet kept moving forward. But power had already shifted. Not through force, not through volume. Through systems, through structure, through a woman who understood exactly when to stop enduring and when to act. And everyone watching knew it. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a turning point. The words "owner on board" didn't echo loudly, but they didn't need to. They spread through the cabin like a pressure wave, quiet yet absolute, bending every assumption in their path. Faces shifted, backs straightened. The same people who had been watching with concern were now watching with clarity. The older attendant stared at the woman as if seeing her for the first time. "That's not possible," he said too quickly. If this were your aircraft, we would have been notified." The woman tilted her head slightly, not amused, not offended. "You were," she replied. She lifted her phone just enough for the crew to see the screen, not the details, just the interface. Live operational access. Real-time telemetry, the kind of control no passenger ever touched. "I chose not to announce myself," she continued. "I wanted to see how you treated someone you thought had no leverage." The first attendant swallowed hard. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," the woman said evenly. "This is a pattern." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another passenger leaned back slowly, processing the magnitude of what was unfolding. The younger attendant's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her tablet. Everything made sense now, the code, the flags, the calm. She had never seen power wear such an unassuming face. The older attendant took a step back, voice dropping. "Mom, we can resolve this privately." That word again, privately. The woman's eyes hardened not with anger, but with resolve. "You already chose public," she said. "The moment you put your hands on me, all do." "Sender, why am Ling the rivet?" She turned slightly, addressing the cabin now, not the crew. "For the record," she said, voice steady and clear, "I'm not interested in punishment driven by ego. I'm interested in accountability driven by facts." She glanced back at the attendants. "And the facts are already logged." On the phone, the voice returned. "Mom, confirmation complete. Crew credentials suspended. Flight operations are rerouting." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as systems adjusted. A soft chime followed routine, procedural, final. The first attendant's knees seemed to weaken. "We didn't know," she said quietly. The woman met her gaze. "That's the problem." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Not shocked silence, reckoning silence. The woman stepped back into the aisle, no longer hemmed in by accusation or doubt. She stood tall, shoulders relaxed, presence undeniable. "You didn't assault a passenger," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "You assaulted the owner of this aircraft." The sentence landed cleanly, surgically. No one spoke, no one moved. Somewhere in the back of the cabin, a phone vibrated with an incoming message. Somewhere else, a breath was released after being held too long. The woman turned back toward her seat, adjusting her blazer as she sat, not reclaiming territory, but concluding a chapter. The reveal was complete. And now, there would be consequences not fueled by rage, but enforced by structure. The kind that reshapes industries. The kind that makes sure this never happens again. The consequences didn't arrive with shouting. They arrived with systems. A low chime pulsed through the cabin speakers, soft, neutral, unmistakably procedural. The kind of sound passengers usually ignored because it meant nothing dramatic. Today, it meant everything. The older attendant looked down at his tablet again, fingers tapping harder now. Nothing responded. His access badge blinked once, then went dark. "What's happening?" he demanded, turning toward the galley as if answers might be hiding there. No one answered him. The first attendant tried her own device. Same result, locked out. No crew dashboard, no internal messaging. The authority she had leaned on minutes earlier evaporated without ceremony. On the woman's phone, the calm voice spoke again. "Crew status updated. All operational permissions suspended pending investigation. The aircraft will divert to the nearest approved private terminal." A pause. Then, "Media protocols are standing by." The word media landed hard. A few passengers exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "This is real." Another murmured, "They're done." The younger attendant near the galley felt her knees weaken not from fear, but from the sudden clarity of it all. She stepped aside instinctively, no longer part of the wall that had boxed the woman in. Her tablet chimed again, this time with a system notice she could still see. Access revoked. Supervisory review initiated. The older attendant's voice dropped. "Mom, please, we can talk to headquarters. This doesn't need to our..." The woman turned to him slowly. Her expression hadn't changed since the beginning. No satisfaction, no anger, just certainty. "It already does," she said. She gestured subtly toward the cabin. "Every person here saw what happened. This isn't a conversation you control anymore." The captain's voice came over the intercom, tight but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We will be making an unscheduled landing shortly. Please remain seated. No explanation, no apology, just confirmation." A ripple moved through the passengers. Not panic, but awe. They were witnessing something rare, power correcting itself in real time. The first attendant stared at the floor now, shoulders slumped, bravado gone. The older one ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. "You didn't have to do this," he muttered. The woman met his gaze. "I did," she replied. "Because if I don't, you do it to the next person." Silence followed, the kind that didn't invite argument. As the jet began its gradual descent, the cabin lights adjusted automatically, a subtle shift, but symbolic. Everything was changing now, whether anyone liked it or not. Phones were no longer hidden. Passengers typed quickly, quietly. Messages sent, stories drafted, not rumors accounts, witnessed, time-stamped. The younger attendant took a step forward, voice shaking. "I'm sorry," she said softly to the woman, "not the crew." The woman nodded once. "You spoke when it mattered," she replied. "That counts." The engines changed pitch as the aircraft angled downward. Outside, clouds slid past the windows, indifferent to human hierarchy. Inside, hierarchy had just collapsed. Not because someone yelled, not because someone fought back, but because the wrong people pushed too far, and the right person decided to stop letting it slide. By the time the wheels touched down, the outcome was no longer in question. This crew would not fly again anytime soon, and an industry, watching from the ground, was about to learn that some lines once crossed trigger consequences that can't be smoothed over, spun away, or quietly buried. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with a rerouted flight plan and a system that finally did what it was built to do. And everyone on board knew they had just witnessed the collapse of unchecked authority at 30,000 feet. The jet rolled to a controlled stop on the private terminal runway, far from crowds, far from noise. The engines powered down one by one, their hum fading into silence. It was the quiet after impact, not of metal, but of consequence. Inside the cabin, no one moved at first. The attendants stood frozen near the galley, stripped not just of access, but of certainty. The authority they had relied on was gone, replaced by the uncomfortable weight of what they had done and who had witnessed it. The woman remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, not because she was tired, because she understood the importance of timing. When she stood, it was unhurried. She smoothed the front of her blazer, straightened her shoulders, and turned to face the cabin. Every eye followed her. Phones were lowered now. No one wanted to miss a word. "I want to be very clear," she said, voice steady, carrying without effort. "This didn't happen because of one mistake." She paused, letting the sentence settle. "It happened because systems get comfortable when no one challenges them." She looked toward the crew, not accusing, not triumphant, simply honest. "I didn't ground this flight out of anger," she continued. "I grounded it because what happened here should never be possible. Not for me, not for anyone." The younger attendant felt a lump rise in her throat. She had expected shouting, humiliation. Instead, she was hearing leadership. "This aircraft," the woman went on, "operates under standards that exist to protect people. When those standards are ignored, the response isn't silence, it's correction." She glanced briefly toward the window, where the terminal lights reflected off polished glass. Somewhere beyond those walls, teams were already moving, investigations already underway, reports already locked into systems that didn't forget. The woman turned back to the cabin. "Every decision made today will be reviewed. Transparently, thoroughly. A beat. And every person who spoke up," she added, eyes flicking briefly to the businessman, the woman who had stood, the younger attendant, "will be remembered." A collective exhale moved through the passengers, not relief, but release. The tension that had knotted the cabin since takeoff finally loosened. The captain's door opened quietly. He stepped out, posture rigid, eyes respectful. "Mom," he said, "ground operations are standing by." She nodded once. "Thank you." As she walked down the aisle, passengers instinctively stepped back to give her space, not because they were told to, but because presence demanded it. Not dominance, presence. At the door, she stopped and turned back, one last time. "Respect isn't about knowing who someone is," she said. "It's about how you treat them when you think they're nobody." No one spoke, no one needed to. She exited the aircraft into the cool night air, heels clicking softly against the tarmac. A waiting vehicle idled nearby, discreet, efficient. As the door closed behind her, the cabin remained still changed. By morning, statements would be released. By afternoon, policies would be reviewed. By the end,